All right, everyone, let's start to talk about modern art. Modern art is going to relate to our next project, and it's very similar to something that we learned about last year called abstract art. When we looked at these three works of art in our sketchbook just now, we should have noticed a few things that they all have in common. First, we noticed that they have movement. Movement can be created in a lot of different ways in an artwork, using colors, lines, or shapes in a specific way to show movement. We're also going to be talking about figure drawing. That means drawing a body of a person in a pose. And we're going to talk about how we can take a pose of a figure and turn the motion that they are creating into something that is abstract. So we saw that this is a photograph of a person walking down the stairs. This is an abstract painting of a person walking down the stairs, and another kind of abstract version of motion of a person. So abstract or modern art, they're basically the same thing. We know last year that abstract art can be a work of art that looks kind of random. Lines, colors, and shapes put together, and we can't really pick out things that we recognize until we look a little bit closer. Some abstract works of art are a little bit more recognizable with their subject. Sometimes you can pick out things that you recognize, like people. Sometimes it's a little bit more random, and it's harder to tell what the work of art is actually about. So the big deal of modern or abstract art, the reason why we talk a lot about it, is because before modern or abstract art became popular, artists thought that realistic works of art, like the Mona Lisa and these other two works of art, were the only good works of art. They thought good art had to be realistic. But then some artists started to change people's mind. They started making works of art that did not look very realistic. They looked kind of random and different. So we call this abstract art. When I take a shape, a line, or a color, and I put these together to make a different type of picture. So we can still tell that this one down below is a city or a landscape because there's things that we recognize, like the shape of a mountain, the shape of a tree, the shape of a building. So if we look closer, it's kind of like a puzzle or a discovery to tell what this actually is. Sculpture is the same way. We can tell that this is a realistic sculpture of a person, and this also reminds me of a sculpture of a person. It's just a little bit more abstract with the shapes that are put together. Same thing with rooms or still lifes. This, if I look closely, I can see some things that I recognize from a room or a still life, but it's not exactly real life like a photograph. So the characteristics of abstract art are there's little or no recognizable subject. So sometimes you can tell what the work of art is, sometimes it's just a lot of expressive lines and shapes. So let's talk about two artists. The first artist is Marcel Duchamp. He was creating art around the time when abstract art was first invented. So he was one of the first abstract artists. He was also an artist who was creating art right around the time that the camera was first invented in the 1920s. So he was interested in something called sequential movement, and this is going to be really important for our project. It's capturing many different poses in one picture. Why was he interested in this? Because when the camera was invented, he was taking these really interesting pictures of people in tiny little poses. When you put it all together, it creates one motion. So this is a photograph of a man walking down a flight of stairs. So Marcel Duchamp thought, I could take this idea of capturing little motions with a camera and turn it into an abstract work of art. So here's an abstract version of a person walking down the stairs, an abstract painting that he created. If you look at more contemporary artists, and that means artists who are making artwork today, Peter Janssen is an artist who creates sculptures that represent the same idea of sequential movement. So his sculptures are really amazing. All these tiny little poses of this person put together make one little motion. So the motion could be as simple as jumping up in the air, but all these motions that you need to make that one pose of jumping up in the air are put together. They're really beautiful and interesting to look at. This one right here is very complex. It has maybe 100 poses to create this one motion of running. So what we're going to try and do is create a drawing that shows sequential movement. So we're going to draw at least 5 poses of a figure, that means a person, doing some sort of activity that involves movement. You will use something called a paper mannequin to form your poses. And then later we'll talk about what colors we're going to add to show some expression and movement, just like these two works of art down here. So the paper mannequin is going to look like this. You're going to pose the paper mannequin in at least 5 different poses to make one motion. So kind of like this motion, it looks like this person is about to do a cartwheel. So as you overlap your lines in your poses, it's going to start to look a little bit abstract, like the artist that we saw, but we can still tell that this is a sequence of motion. So just like these 3 works of art right here, this is a 5th grader from a couple years ago who finished their project. And there's a lot of different ways that you can finish the project. He even thought about, could I add a picture of myself in there to show the first step of the motion? And that's fine too. So what you're going to do first is, in your sketchbook, I would like you to, on a blank page, make a list of some different activities that involve movement. So they could be simple like running or kicking a ball, maybe a sport like dancing. So make a list and then pick your favorite one that you would like to do for your final project. Then you're going to trace your mannequin 1 or 2 times in your sketchbook, just as practice before you start on your final project, just to get the feel of tracing the mannequin. So you're going to use overlapping lines to show movement, and then later we'll talk about the color scheme we're going to use. We're going to use analogous colors. That means colors that are similar to each other to show movement. So here's kind of how I started. After I practiced in my sketchbook sketching my mannequin and I know what pose I want to do or what sequence of movements, I'm going to get my big white paper and my mannequin and start to sketch things out with my pencil. So in your baskets at your table, you have some worksheets that look like this. I've captured some sequences of movements that you could use if you need a visual. So I'm doing a dancer that's leaping up in the air. So I'm going to take my mannequin and just pose the first pose in the sequence. That might be the dancer with their legs on the floor and their arms kind of still. They're not moving yet. So that's the first still motion. Once I sketch that out and it looks right, then I can go over it with my Sharpie marker just to finalize it and then erase the pencil lines. Then the next sequence of motions would be maybe the dancer is about to lift their arms and legs because they're going to leap up in the air. So I'll sketch that out, overlap a little bit. It's okay if they intersect on top of each other. Erase the pencil lines and trace with the Sharpie. So I have 2 motions in my sequence so far. So then I'll think about the next motion that will be in the sequence, pose the mannequin, trace it, and overlap that pose. So as I finish, I should have at least 5 or more. This person decided to do a lot of poses, like maybe even 30. So at least 5 is okay. So we're going to be talking about figure drawing, so accurately figure drawing, neatness, and creativity. So let's start now with just practicing tracing our mannequin in our sketchbook, and we're going to make a list of words that we could use for our final project, a sequence of motions.